Japan, South Africa, Singapore, and Indonesia.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Yuni and my colleague Faisal. Together we will be your master of ceremonies for this event. On behalf of organizing committee, we would like to welcome all you all in the international webinar of Transforming Good Paper to Great Paper in Nutrition and Health. This webinar is proudly presented by Department of Nutrition and Human Nutrition Research Center, Indonesian Medical Education and Research Institute Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia, in collaboration with Summit Institute for Development.
First of all, let me introduce you to the agenda of today's event. We will set the ball rolling with the opening remark from the Dean of Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia. Then, we will have two interesting sessions about data analysis and manuscript writing, especially for those who are interested in publishing impactful papers. We will end each session with a question and answer session.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now listen to the national anthem of Indonesia, Indonesia Raya. All participants and panelists are invited to turn on the camera.
To start, we will now invite Professor Ari Fahrial Syam as the Dean of the Faculty to give the opening remark. To Prof. Ari, the time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everybody. I, Ari Fahrial Syam, as the Dean of Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia, would like to extend my warmest welcome to all participants to spatial event, international webinar. And also we have some speakers here, Dr. Anuraj Shankar from University of Oxford, Daniel Fatori, PhD from University of Sao Paulo Medical School, Brazil. And also we have Elizabeth Prado, PhD from University of California, Davis, USA. And we have local speakers, Dr. Rina Agustina and also Dr. Diki from our Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia. Yes, I think it is just great pleasure for you to join our international webinars this morning here in the Jakarta Times. Yeah, today, today international webinar will bring up the topics that the master ceremony mentioned: the transforming good paper to great paper on nutrition and health. Nutrition and health are part of the need for the society. Don't only survive, but only thrive. Research plays an important role in providing the basis for more effective evidence-based intervention programs to optimize nutrition and health among societies. A holistic and integrated program has been implemented, but the participation and the scope of the program still need improvement. Analysis of high-quality data is important for evidence-based decision-making by the government, especially in low and middle-income countries. Moreover, publication in the form of research articles is needed to disseminate the result of the analysis to have a local, national, and global impact. To build the capacity of researchers working in low and middle income countries, especially for data analysis and writing high impact publications. So, Faculty of Medicine and together with some stakeholder, we hold an international webinar today. Again, with the title, Transforming Good Paper to Great Paper on Nutrition and Health. That the master ceremony mentioned as well that this workshop is supported by the Department of Nutrition and Human Nutrition Research Center, IMERI, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia, and also also with support from the Summit Institute of Development. Finally, I congratulate all members of committee who work hard to prepare for this event. Hopefully, this webinar can improve the quality of health for community and also the rise the quality of nation health to higher level. Thank you for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Professor Ari, for the excellent opening.
Okay, next we will have a photo session together. We would like to invite all speakers, moderators, and participants to turn on the camera. Okay.
Okay.
Everyone ready? I will give a cue. In 1, 2, and 3. Again, yeah. 1, 2, say cheese. Okay, once more. Give a thumbs. 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Okay, thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Next, we will start with the first session. To lead this session, I'd like to invite Dr. Indah Suci Widyahening, PhD, as the moderator of this session.
Yes. Okay, we'll read Dr. Indah CV. Dr. Indah graduates from the Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia. She has her PhD in clinical epidemiology from the University Medical Center Utrecht, the Netherlands. Dr. Indah is part of the writings team of the IMERI Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia, and Associate Professor of the Community Medicine Department, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia. She has published more than 95 publications with H index of 13 and 8,141 citations. Okay, Dr. Indah, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, the MC, for the nice introduction. Good morning, dear participants. Welcome to the first session. In this session, we will have three distinguished speakers. Dr. Anuraj Shankar from Oxford University, Dr. Daniel Fatori from University of Sao Paulo Medical School, Brazil, and Dr. Rina Agustina from Universitas Indonesia. The first topic will be how to write a great paper and publish in high impact journal in nutrition and health by Dr. Shankar. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Anuraj Shankar. Of course, I believe for some of us, he would not need some introduction, but I proceed anyway. Dr. Shankar is an honorary research fellow from Nuffield Department of Medicine, University of Oxford, UK. Previously, he had been working at Harvard School of Public Health and in the Department of Nutrition, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. He had also worked at WHO Geneva and Helen Keller International. He had 86 peer-reviewed publications and 10 book chapters and monographs, and his current age index is 38 with more than 9,000 citations. Wonderful. So Dr. Anuraj, I would like to for you to start with your presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'll just share my screen here. Okay. Okay. Okay, great. You're able to see that I'm successfully sharing?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, thanks so much. And very excited to be here with everyone today. And thanks so much, Inda, for a very nice introduction. So we just want to kick off the webinar today with this idea about how to actually write a paper and how to do some research that is really high impact. And the first thing I really wanted to highlight was this idea that a great paper tells a story. I think this is extremely important to understand. And here I've just shown that this sort of on the y-axis, in a regular story, there might be a main character. In your papers, the main character is really the idea, the hypothesis. And so in terms of how people are thinking about your idea and your story, it goes from sort of being under despair or sad to your idea, you're becoming very prosperous or interesting. So this is sort of the fluctuations in your hypothesis throughout your paper. So a story that is not interesting, or I would say not a story, is in fact is just routine. The idea that you present and how it progresses through the paper, your process of discovery, is not interesting. It doesn't really change and show the excitement of what's happening. Then another story you see in B, it is a story. You're telling a story of discovery. So as you flow through the paper, in fact, there's some ups and downs in terms of what you're actually seeing emerging in your experiments or in your analysis. And then finally, there's really a fascinating thing that happens towards the end of the paper, some of the really interesting analyses or the findings. You can also have another storyline where essentially you start off with a really amazing idea and concept. It goes through the sort of low period where maybe it's not so interesting, but then it becomes very interesting in the end. So there's these different sorts of storylines that are very important that end up following really your process of discovery. So these are just some characteristics of an average paper, average or good paper, not necessarily a great paper. So these are key things to be thinking about. For instance, your topic is not relevant or it's not interesting to a wide audience. Conclusions don't have any implication of interest. And I really want to highlight number 3, which is the recommendations are too specific or not generalizable. So for instance, someone might, let's say you're doing some study or writing some paper about a population in Indonesia. So for instance, if you're saying something like, this is the first time this work is being shown in Indonesia, and that's why it's important. So that would not be of interest to, a wider audience, at the global scale. So you want to come up with some other reason, why this is important, usually focusing on the main hypothesis idea. So I always say you want to go for a wow study from the beginning, and that's what really makes your paper, helps your paper become a great paper. So as I said, it should have national or global implications. You want to think about taking on a key issue, like something that is really doing a definitive research approach, really to answer a big question. And I'll show you some examples of that here. And these are what we call these, key wow characteristics. So either the technique you're using to do the work or to analyze the data, it's an innovative approach. Whatever your conclusions are, it creates a new idea, right? New hypotheses. So new discovery. This is important to be thinking about in the beginning. And this is a key point, that the question that you pose is so interesting, in fact, that it doesn't matter if the result of your hypothesis is that you reject or you prove that, or you're consistent with that hypothesis. And again, I'll show you some examples of that. Just some key tips in choosing a relevant topic, identifying hot issues. So right now, of course, SARS-CoV-2 is very, very important, huge pandemic in the world affecting, billions of people. So issues related to the pandemic right now are extremely important, and that, of course, will be considered a hot topic. The other one is identifying longstanding unsolved issues. So, for instance, stunting, the issue of nutritional stunting, solving that at scale is still an unsolved issue. Also, interventions to reduce obesity, to prevent more effectively chronic disease in the nutrition community. These are still actually, unsolved issues. Also issues, for instance, of microbiome, how important that is, which known it's important, how to intervene or manipulate that, that's still, unclear. So think about how you can, identify these hot topics from the beginning, and in your paper, how you can frame it, how you can frame your conclusions in the context of, for instance, what might be a hot topic now. So choosing an innovative topic, I don't want to go into this in too much detail, but just to highlight that if you do this, you'll actually learn a lot more from it yourself, even as a scientist. And if the topic you choose is less exciting, then try to think how you can, again, interpret that in a more innovative way, apply a new analysis technique or building a new interpretation of that. So these are just some ideas about how to make your conclusion more interesting. If you're looking at some intervention on some outcome, like nutritional supplementation, for example, on some outcome, whether it be hypertension or survival, think about what would be a new thing in that. Can you look at dose response, a nonlinear effect? Maybe there's a threshold of that effect that you could identify. Is there some spatial association with that? Maybe in some parts of the country, this has a bigger effect, other parts does not, or other parts of the world has a big effect, some places it doesn't. So think about those kind of things, some added value that would be there. So let me walk you through a very interesting example of a paper that was published in a New England Journal, and to sort of think about how this goes from being a good paper to a great paper. So again, remember we talked about an interesting question. So this this group of authors was asking that, what is the cause of not just congenital malformations, but this phenomenon of several different congenital malformations happening in the same child. And it's known that 2% of births did have major congenital malformations, but there are sort of groups of these malformations that occur together. So they wanted to know what actually are the causes of that. And so that's an important question, right? So they chose an important question that had not been answered yet. So their first step actually was to say, well, we're going to identify families that have high fetal loss. The pregnancies, the rate of fetal loss was very high. And if they did have a child, there was this presence of these congenital malformations, a lot of them in the same child. So they were able to identify in Australia, this was where it was done, 13 families, and this is just an example of some of them, you know, a boy or girl, if the child died, and if it was a fetal loss, as indicated here in a triangle. And so by identifying these 13 families, they were then able to go through and do genetic sequencing of the family members. And what they observed was that in 3 of the families, they found these deletion variants for these 2 genes, hydroxyanthracylic acid and hydroxyanthracylic acid 3,4-dioxygenase and kynureninase. So it's interesting, right? So not in all the families they found this, but really in these 3 families. So when they looked at this, what's the importance of these? They realized that these enzymes were actually involved in the NAD, so nucleotide nicotinamide adenine diphosphate, which is a key energy substrate in the body, necessary for energy sources, helps in production of ATP and so forth, that these enzymes were involved in that pathway, which generally known as the kynurenin pathway. So they started to think, well, gee, this might be potentially important in that. So really at this point, it's a good paper. It's interesting, right? They went through, they observed that they found the families, and they did make a discovery. So at this point, it's a good paper, but now it starts to move towards being a great paper. So what's one of the things they did? They said, okay, listen, if it's involved in those pathways, these 2 enzymes, those substrates from the biochemical standpoint that are upstream of the mutations, those would end up being higher in concentrations. The one downstream, you would see reduction in concentrations. And certainly that's what they saw. They took one of the families that had large numbers of family members. They were able to assess the concentrations of these biochemical factors upstream and downstream of this particular mutation. This is the HAAO mutation. And they could see that, in fact, upstream there's accumulation of the metabolites, and downstream there's a reduction. Again, suggesting that these mutations were important in that health of the person. It wasn't just sort of a general mutation that they found from genomic analysis. So now they really take it into being a great paper. So what they did was the mutations that they found, they actually went and created these mutations in a mouse model. And they were able to replicate the exact same congenital birth defects that they found in the human beings. So in the HAAO deletions, you can see actually in these pictures, the same sort of congenital malformations in the spinal column, in the hand, also heart malformations, and also in the kynureninase deletion, similar types of mutations. So now they can replicate that mutation in the animal model and create the same thing. So wow, now this has become really amazing story. And then the question becomes, well, if it's in the vitamin B3 or the niacin pathway, then in fact, if we add more vitamin B3 or niacin to the pathway, can we rescue this? Can we rescue the pups who have this mutation? And they were able to show that, yes, in fact, if they increase the amount of this vitamin B3 in the diet, that in fact the NAD levels go up. And even more interesting than that, in fact, they were able to show that fewer pups were born with these congenital malformations. So actually, niacin deficient diet plus 10 or 15 mg per liter of niacin actually rescued all the pups, so they didn't have the congenital malformations. So this became a really interesting story, essentially, right? Going from something that is general discovery, trying to understand the cause of these congenital birth defects occurring together in a group, identifying these couple of genes, being able to replicate that in an animal model, and then showing how you could rescue that with vitamin B3 supplementation. So now they've created a whole field, basically, of understanding how B3 is important, maybe an underappreciated role of vitamin B3 in congenital birth defects. So it's just an example of how something goes from a good paper to a great paper. So just another couple of interesting examples. Many of you know about this supplementation for multiple micronutrients intervention trial done in Indonesia, large-scale trial, showed that multiple micronutrients reduce the death in the child. So what was interesting about this was actually a 10-year follow-up that was done on these kids, which showed that, in fact, there was a long-term impact of the multiple micronutrient supplementation on child cognition at 9 to 12 years of age. And it had an effect size of 0.1 standard deviations, more or less. So yeah, it's interesting, right? You might say, wow, that's interesting. You went back and you followed up and you found 20,000 of these, kids from these 32,000 pregnancies or so. You did this a lot of cognitive testing, very interesting. But, is this 0.1 standard deviation, is that really interesting, right? So you might say, well, it's not interesting. And so we thought, well, can we look at this data more? Is there something else useful there? We realized, in fact, we had a lot of information on predictors of cognitive performance that had never been looked at, right? Multiple predictors, psychosocial and biomedical determinants associated with different cognitive domains. So this analysis could be done. First time in the world such a thing had been done, understanding the relative contributions of biomedical risk factors and psychosocial risk factors on multiple cognitive domains. So then it goes from being sort of a good paper to a great paper because there's something new here, right? And something that had never been able to be shown before. And in fact, you can see here, this sort of orangish box, this is the contribution of stunting. So you see postnatal growth, this is the contribution of stunting, in fact, to these cognitive domains. And you see that it's pretty small, right? Because many people have been saying that, stunting, serious effect on cognitive development in children. This is one reason why we have to reduce stunting. But in fact, these data were suggesting, wait a minute, maybe there's not such a big impact of child stunting on child cognition. Stunting is still important, but maybe there's something else going on with child cognition. So to make this go from a great paper to make it into sort of a great idea, in fact, Dr. Prado, who will speak to you later on this call, actually decided to do this systematic review and look at all interventions that affect both the growth of the child, where they also assessed child cognition. And so they were able to show here that, in fact, there's not actually a strong association between linear growth of children and child cognition. So you see this figure here, and this is indicating very clearly, you don't see a strong correlation actually between these slopes and what you're finding here between these other cognitive or developmental outcomes. So, and then looking at that more clearly, being able to see that, in fact, those interventions specifically focused on child development have very big impacts, 4 to 5-fold more important impacts than nutrition. So this is highlighting, again, an interesting discovery, making sort of it into a great idea or a great paper that, in fact, nutrition, I'm sorry, but, nutrition itself, perhaps not having that big of an impact on child cognition, but nurturing and stimulation certainly having a very large effect. So to make your paper also a very important paper, go for what we call this wow figure. Some of the characteristics of a wow figure is it shows multiple different ideas, multidimensional. The viewer can see the importance of it right away. They can view that one figure and think about what are all the different ideas in that figure, provide micro and macro views, basically showing the overall importance hypothesis, but also the details of that. So I think I'm running towards the end of my time. I just want to focus on a few things. This is an excellent book, resource, visual display of quantitative information, but I want to walk you through maybe a couple examples here, I'll skip over this, of a wow figure that showed up recently in a paper by Dr. Rina Agustina I think, who's also going to be a speaker today. And this is basically showing what is the BPJS coverage in Indonesia, the national health insurance coverage, in different ages and economic groups. So it's interesting, the story here, right? So you can see here that in young kids, 0 to 4, in fact, overall coverage of national health insurance was relatively low. Even the richest, right, we're only getting about half of them. Those kids were being covered by national health insurance. And then if you follow this over time, you start seeing the poorest group, right? See this lowest group, Q1, the poorest ones, they start getting a bit higher coverage, especially now when you get up to above age 40, where you have still the richest people being covered the most by national health insurance, but now the poor group is the second most covered one. So, but the ones in between are not being covered that much. So if you look at this, it has these multidimensional characteristics. What's the coverage between rich and poor and by age? So you can learn a lot just from looking at this one figure. So that's what sort of a wow figure is about. So the keys to a great paper, interesting topic, of course, well-executed study, make a clear discovery of interest. So whether or not you prove your hypothesis, or I guess you can't prove it, but whether you reject it or it's consistent with your hypothesis is doesn't matter, because the work is done so well and the idea is so important. And the paper should, of course, make the findings relevant in a broad context, not a narrow group, but in fact a broad context, that this work is important and hopefully leads to a new idea or a new hypothesis of some sort. So I'm going to end there. Thank you so much. Remember, this quote from Helen Keller, alone we can do so little, but together as a group we can do so much. And you can see on many of these papers, the author teams were quite large. And so that's how I think success is achieved. So thank you. Over to you, Dr. Indra.
Okay. Wow, that's surely an eye-opening presentation, Dr. Anuraj. Thank you very much. The second topic will be approach to advanced and innovative data analysis in high-impact paper by Dr. Fatori. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Daniel Fatori. Dr. Fatori is currently a postdoctoral researcher specialized in cognitive behavioral therapy at the University of Sao Paulo Medical School, funded by the Sao Paulo Research Foundation. He earned his PhD in psychiatry from University Sao Paulo Medical School. Over the years, he dedicates his time to study clinical epidemiology, clinical trials methods, and data science. In the last 3 years, he has published 31 publications. In the last years also, as an emerging young researcher, he was the recipient of 3 international grants as co-principal investigator. He is currently dedicated to using digital technology in the context of psychiatry, early childhood development, and maternal mental health. So, Dr. Fatori, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Do I have 20 minutes? Is that
yes.
right?
Yes, true.
Okay, thank you. So I'll be sharing here my screen. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor to be presenting this event. So since you already presented me, gave much detail around my background, I think I'm gonna skip this and go straight to the main topic. So before I talk about complex data analysis and innovative data analysis, I just would like to maybe try to define some concepts here. I know it's kind of arbitrary, and depending on the field, it can be very different. So for the purpose of this presentation, I think that I will consider basic data analysis, t-tests, ANOVAs, linear regression, and chi-square, stuff like that. And for intermediate data analysis, I will consider mixed models in general, and everything beyond that I will consider advanced for this purpose, for the purpose of this presentation. So first of all, I would like to mention, because I think it's very important, I don't think that a complex analysis is always really needed. You don't need to complicate things to publish in high impact paper or to publish in high impact journals. I think just like Dr. Anuraj said in his presentation, what really matters is a good research question, a question that is relevant, that is trying to solve a scientific problem that is interesting and that can impact people, communities, society. And a well-designed study is also very important to answer a good question, and you need to have reliable data. So I think these 3 points here are even more important than doing like fancy analysis, a complex analysis, advanced analysis. And to illustrate that, I just would like to show this paper from the New England Journal of Medicine from a professor at the University of Sao Paulo Medical School from a couple of years ago. He tested an intervention that is becoming more and more common in psychiatry, is transcranial electrode direct current therapy. And he found a very interesting effect of this intervention on depression. And as you can see here, I highlighted part of the statistical analysis description, and he just used a t-test, right? So this is very basic statistical analysis, but he developed a very interesting study, a very interesting intervention that is very relevant for society and for the scientific community. So he was able to publish at the New England Journal of Medicine. And here's just another example from my department, also from a couple of years ago, published in one of the top 5 psychiatric journals. This is just a clinical trial with 16 people. So just like the other paper, they just show the means and tested the differences between both groups and were able to publish in a very good journal. So now I will talk a little bit about some advanced data analysis that can help you publish it in high impact journals, and can also help you try to answer some very difficult and very complex questions that we have nowadays in science. The idea is not to do like a tutorial or something. It's just to point in some directions. So the first thing I would like to say is about causal inference. Science is moving more and more away from just doing tests to see p-values and see if there is statistically significant. We are more and more interested in actually knowing cause and effect. And if you just do like a regular linear regression, t-test, ANOVA, and any other statistical test like that, it's very difficult to prove that you really found a cause and effect relationship. So people are working really hard to develop new models to test cause and effect. One book that is very interesting is this one that I'm showing this slide, The Book of Why by Judea Pearl. He has a very interesting framework on how to approach cause and effect in studies. And gone are the days of just running stepwise regression, bivariate analysis, and focusing on p-values. We are going in a direction that we are doing analysis that are theory-driven. It's based on clear hypotheses and careful thinking of variables. You just don't go around testing dozens and dozens of variables against dozens and dozens of variables. You just do like a very careful approach on what variables are going to be studied. And one way to select variables for this kind of model is use directed acyclic graphs. And here there is an example of a it's a very complex model, but here is a little bit simplified, the relationship between intelligence in adulthood and childhood intelligence. And this graph here is showing that you have the variable u, that if you look at u in an isolated manner, you will find probably a statistical association, a significant p-value. But as you can see, there's much more to be seen here. There's much more in this picture. So if you don't consider this variable u, you probably end up with a wrong assumption if you just run an analysis between you and adult intelligence, because as you can see, there's income, educational attainment, and childhood intelligence. One other approach that is very interesting is by Professor Andrew Hayes. He has a very good book on how to assess, how to analyze mediators and moderators. And mediators and moderators are very important when you are trying to establish cause and effect between variables. So a mediator is it's the study of how an effect is transmitted to an outcome. It's basically trying to understand the mechanism of this association. So how X is influencing Y, it's probably because there's a variable M that is transmitting this effect in an indirect manner. And the moderator is a variable that is modifying the effect of X on Y. So it can be sex, it can be age, it can be any sort of variable depending on the field and type of study you are analyzing. Okay, so moving on to another topic. Sometimes you don't have all the data you were supposed to have because you have missing values. So there are a couple of ways to dealing with missing data, and for that you probably need some advanced analysis. T-tests, linear regression can't deal with that alone. So one way to do this is use generalized estimating equations. This is a specific statistical technique used to analyze longitudinal data. So if you have, for instance, here I have 4 time points. If the subject has at least one assessment done, you can include this subject in the analysis, don't lose this subject in your model. So you don't need to do nothing too fancy here. You just include the independent variable in the model, and the rest the model will take care of. The only issue is sometimes if you have a very small sample size, it can be problematic. Sometimes you don't find a convergence in the model, and sometimes it's difficult to find an adequate covariance structure. I can't go in details what is exactly a covariance structure because of the time limit of this presentation, but sometimes it's an issue especially in small sample sizes. Another way to deal with missing data, and that is even more complex than using GE, it's multiple imputations by chain of equations. Here is a statistical technique that we try to predict. We try to fill these missing variables, using dozens and dozens of statistical models to predict what these missing values was supposed to be in the first place. And then you make like multiple predictions. You have like multiple data sets that have different values of these predicted missing values. And then when you run your analysis, you will see the pooled estimates. I will show that in the next slide. Here I'm just showing how a brief simplified version of how to code its data. And you have the main command, and then you can try to predict continuous variables, binary variables, all sorts of different distributions. And then in orange, I just point out the model what are going to be the predictors of the missing values. And here I used all the outcomes of the study, and then I selected to have at least 100 data sets, imputation data sets. And here it's just an example of this kind of model using a data set of a study we conducted here in Brazil. As you can see in the table at the top, I have missing values. I have 81 subjects at baseline, and I start losing some subjects as I do more assessments. But at the table at the bottom, as you can see, I did multiple imputation by chained equations, and I was able to include 81 subjects in the analysis using 100 imputation data sets, and the coefficients here are the pooled parameters considering all the data sets. So this is very important because, especially if you are dealing with clinical trials, it's very important to include all subjects that are randomized. And if you don't deal with missing data with some of these techniques, you probably won't publish it in a high journal. So another interesting technique that is getting a lot of attention these days is network analysis. It's a very interesting approach that can help you answer some very specific questions in some fields. In my field, that is mental health. Here you can see an example of a network analysis. Here, the researcher analyzed depression and anxiety across childhood, and it's difficult to interpret this network analysis if this is your first time. But basically, he's trying to say here that there's not much differences between depression and anxiety. They just cluster all together in like it's one disease, one disorder, and these networks are not that different. Going from 5 years to 14 years old. And you can pull out all sorts of interesting parameters to interpret the data. Here the researcher is showing the strength of the connections. Each of these symptoms, they have this strength indicator, and this is showing how much this symptom influenced the rest of the network. So with this kind of finding, I can plan an intervention to focus on specific symptoms that are very, very strong in influencing the other symptoms. And there are all sorts of different approaches that you can use with different network analysis. Another one is to study the speech pattern in people. So this paper here from a researcher in Brazil is showing that the structure of speech of people with psychosis are very different from adults and adults without psychosis, but it's very similar to children without psychosis. I can't go into details about how to interpret these models here because of the time limits. But later you can download this paper and have a look at yourself. But basically, he's showing the connection between words in a speech, and you have all sorts of parameters to understand the connection between words, and then you can test differences between types of speeches between people. Another interesting approach is to use network analysis in a meta-analysis. So in a traditional meta-analysis, you review the literature for interventions and other type of studies, but and then you pull all the parameters to see the pooled effect size. But here, with a network analysis, you can actually compare interventions that weren't being compared in the first place. So you can actually test the relative efficacy of these interventions, considering all the other interventions for the disease that you are studying. So here's just an example of that. You can find many more examples in the literature, and meta-analysis with network analysis are being published in very high-impact journals these days. So one last example that I'm going to show is the curve specification analysis. So up to now, most of what I showed it's very it's tests, statistical techniques that are very common. It's not that difficult to do in current statistical software and statistical packages. But here it's a advanced data analysis technique that is not that common right now, and I think it will be the future. It will probably be the future of science, and I explain why in the next few slides. So probably most of you know that science is having like some difficulties because of the replication crisis. Especially in psychology, medicine, we have this problem that some findings are not replicated by other researchers. We have this kind of problem in neuroimaging, for instance. And this happened because of a lot of scientific practice that are not good, not interesting. And one of them is researcher degrees of freedom. It's basically the idea that I can do an analysis like in my own way, and then if I ask another person who will do in his own way, he will select specific variables. He will take a specific scale and different cutoff, use a different cutoff than what I used. You can use all sorts of different cutoff points, and you can dichotomize variables. You can transform variables. So you can have all sorts of creative manners to use your variables analysis. So this is what we call researcher degrees of freedom. And the specification curve analysis was developed to exactly to deal with this. It's sometimes called multiverse analysis, and you understand why in this slide right here. Basically, instead of doing one model, one analysis, you do like dozens and probably hundreds, or probably even thousands of analyses. And each analysis will be different because you will do something different. You use a different cutoff. You use a different transformation of an independent variable. Like you can use age as a binary variable. You can use age as a continuous variable. You can transform age in 3 categories, 4 categories, and then you will specify each analysis using these differences, and then you ask your statistical package to run all these analyses, and then you pull all the analysis in one graph, and this is the graph. So what you have at the top of the figure is the dozens and in fact hundreds of regression coefficients, and the dotted lines is the median coefficient, and at the bottom of the figure you have this all these black dots. These are p-values, and the red dots are statistical significant p-values. And as you can see, in most of the analysis, in most of the cases, you don't find a significant p-value. And in this case right here, the idea was to see the association between adolescent well-being and digital technology. So if smartphones and social media is influencing mental health in a negative manner. So as you can see, most of the time in most of the analysis, we can't find a clear association between these variables. So this is very interesting, and it's becoming more and more common. And I think it'd be very important in the near future. And just to end my presentation, here I have some other ideas, other data analysis that are very advanced, but can be interesting to answer a series of scientific questions. But my main takeaway message for this presentation is simple can be enough, and I would avoid following trends just because people are doing it. You don't need to do it. Sometimes a t-test is enough. And you just have to choose the best method available to answer your research question. Doesn't matter if it's simple or it's advanced, just use the adequate method test. So here are the references and my slides. I can put these in the chat later, so you can download these later. So thank you for your time. And once again, thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Fatori. It is a very clarifying introduction to different novel approach on data analysis that we often found in the journal articles nowadays. So the third topic will be experience as the first author in the Lancet and other high impact papers in nutrition and health by Dr. Rina Agustina. Of course, yeah, for most of us, Dr. Rina will not need introduction. Yeah, however, because it's my job to introduce her, so I will continue to introduce Dr. Rina. Dr. Rina Agustina is an assistant professor of the Department of Nutrition, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia. She's also the head of Human Nutrition Research Center at the Indonesian Medical Education and Research Institute. She has 20 years of experience in human nutrition and health research in Indonesia and global. She has been working as principal investigator of several large research projects, clinical trial on nutrition in Indonesia, and also as co-investigator of national and international projects, including the Lancet Commission on Healthy Diet and Sustainable Food System, Red Cell Folate, and Neural Tube Defect in 3 ASEAN cities. She has more than 20 PubMed index from 24 Scopus Index publications. Each index is, yeah, I think, I'm sorry, this is, but she has more than 1,700 citations currently. Okay, so Dr. Rina, the time is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Indah. Let me open my sharing my presentation. Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you again to the organizing committee for inviting me to actually tell a story. I will not talk more about the content-wise aspect. My apology for my bad voice today. I have a little bit problem of my throat. So I will talk about the experience as the first author in the Lancet paper, and as well as a few other impact factor paper in nutrition and health. So as mentioned, I'm actually from Department of Nutrition and Human Nutrition Research Center. So this is the outline of I would like to share today. Let's talk a little bit about the condition of authorship in low middle income countries and how we can aim high and what kind of effort and also commitment needed, and also some of the experience and tips for the way taken. We can always question ourselves why we want to publish. I think this is a very nice overview coming from Lee in the Lancet 2017. We really want to communicate or share our ideas and information. But of course, from there, we want to contribute to the new leads connection and give a track of our institution, ourselves, and our country, of our scientific work. And of course, we want our paper to influence the behavior, to change practice, to give a model of change, and of course, to influence the health policy, at the same time giving the education to the publics. But all these are actually about contributing to the national and global commitment. So we want to take part of the national and global commitment. To do this, of course, we could not do alone. It's seldom done by only single researcher or only one scientific paper. The advanced science needs to have many scientists working together. So the key is really a collaboration. The key is really how we can work together in scientific community, having a findings and also find the scientific literature to come up with developing the science. However, what is actually the fact is building the science capacity in middle income country is not always easy. It's the problem is that a lot of people wants to commit. A lot of people wants to build the human resources in low middle income countries. It's explosive actually in the recent 15 years because it's really important to have their capacity to influence the critical component, identifying the progress as national health priorities, and also giving a thought how the health program should be done and how we can provide evidence base to support population health planning and also response to a lot of health crises. But the problem is that, can we do that? Because what happened is that most of authors in low middle income countries are very much underrepresentation, although the cases or the issue is talking about low middle income countries. The number of low middle income countries based on the review from the Lancet Global Health, it shows some increase, but still the proportion of low middle income countries first authors decline for comparing to non-low middle income countries, even talking about their own countries of developing countries or low middle income countries. So here, authors or researchers or people from the low middle income countries miss the opportunities to influence the global, to contribute to global health research. So this is what actually motivation, which makes me sometimes thinking, can we do that? Can we be a first authors? Can we have last authors, corresponding authors at the same time in one good paper? Another review mentioning also, actually, if you look at the increase of low middle income countries first authors, there's some slight increase, but still far contributing compared to the other. But what happened is actually a lack of awareness of authorship criteria by names are very much used instead of really contributing to the paper. And the second is that the first authors likely not to be the authors from low middle income countries, like I mentioned earlier. And usually they will be in the middle of authorship, which shows sometimes not too much of their contribution. And contributing authors of the low middle income countries in the Lancet showing that it's a false sort and the one that we actually expected. Here is one of the modifying figures that I actually take from the analysis done by RACE 2017. See, there's a huge gap of the first authors, second authors, and last authors from low middle income countries compared to high income countries. And especially when it is funded by non-low middle income countries funding in the pediatrics field as well as the other field. 3 years ago, Richard Hurton came to Indonesia. And after that, he published a commentary mentioning that, especially for Indonesia, he said that Indonesia is an offline country, unraveling a lot of mystery of the nation, and size isn't everything. So it's really stimulate my thinking. I want to prove to him that we can do that. And there's an opportunity to do that. And it's good that we finally succeed to do that. So our dream is always, can we actually publish in the Lancet? Can we publish in Nature? Can we publish in New England Journal? It seems to be far away. It seems to be a dream for us in the low middle income countries. But we have to aim high on this one. We have to build this capacity, and we can do that. So what I see from there, if you look at all the impact factor journal, seems to be the work is not like a few months work and then you get accepted. It's only few of that can do that. But most of the papers are actually 3 years work and accepted in 2 years, which actually happening even more when we did it in low middle income countries because of so many barriers. Here is the papers that we published and also mentioned by Dr. Anu on the Lancet Universal Health Coverage in Indonesia. This is not merely my own idea. This is actually coming from initiative from the institute. But of course, I will tell you how actually the process is actually going forward. So this paper now is cited as we expected with impact factor of 56. So exactly by 2 years, we have about more than 100 citation, which actually quite surprising. I mean, quite as we expected. We hope that we can have more. And what happened here is that it's actually the essence, the key is about collaboration. So here I try to summarize how this Lancet paper, the most important here is the first, the last, and corresponding authors are Indonesians. And I'm lucky that I'm part of the first author, where we actually went through about 3 years of the development of the papers. So starting from Richard Houghton came to Indonesia, visit and published that paper. And of course, our dean giving the faculty initiative to take the opportunity that we can build a nice paper together. So if you look at in 2016, the dean lead the big group of the discussion. So a few discussion then also facilitated by GSIS and also by other experts from many different area of expertise. So it's a big groups are happening. But if you look at more to the app, so we have then chance to have a meeting the editor and less people attended and then become a small group that commit, and some are actually not very much or perhaps not attending anymore. So then from this small team, it's become actually solid and exchange ideas, and then we make the manuscript outline. So because the universal health coverage is a hot topic at that time, so it's really important. Then we communicate to the senior editor, Summer Skill, Bill, we call him. And then we have a series of weekend brainstorming in the meeting of Dean Office from many different disciplines. So invite more authors, expert multidisciplinary, and also we invite young scientists. And that's actually very good team, a small team, but we can compile all writing data collection from many angles. So that's really difficult at the first place because there's a lot of perspective when we talk about universal coverage from the mind of the health system expertise, from the economists, from the nutrition, from infection expert, all are coming from different direction, but then all actually can make a nice story together. So we actually send a feedback, get a feedback from editor, although we haven't submitted yet. Then we actually communicate with the editor and we send him the first draft of paper and series draft of revision coming again. We did a lot of meetings and all are voluntary. So none are being paid and none of these are actually being funded. So it's really attracting a lot. This Lancet paper makes people want to work together. And so then we actually look at what kind of data that we can take from this national data from many different hospitals, and we do the data quality and cross-check, improve figures and tables. It's quite challenges, a lot of commitment. And finally, in 2017, we can submit the paper and we get a nice review for 2 rounds, which very, very tough review. And then a lot of change on the manuscript, and we talk together how we can change the shape of the manuscript. They want the manuscript to become very strong and interesting and talking about the future direction. So manuscript change in many ways, but still in the same direction. And then we get finally the editor's comment, which wants us to dream of what we want on our paper, which actually feasible and giving a roadmap to the nation and also the global. So then finally our paper becomes strong and also helped by, we only have involved one international author, Professor Dr. Anuraj Shankar, but most all are coming from Indonesian population expert. So then we can tell the story. It's very comprehensive, it's nice paper and very interesting, really talking about Indonesia. So this actually to come into the threshold of the quality paper of Lancet paper, this commitment and time needed, which actually quite demanding, but finally we succeed, we get accepted. Proofread is also the challenge, and then was big apart from how it actually can be published. And I met directly myself to Richard Houghton, and I asked him why my paper is not published, it's not being published yet. And meeting from him in Japan, and he said, yes, I know you, and okay, I will tell the senior author to make it faster. So then finally, our paper published the end of 2018, and a very nice launching. So all this commitment, 3 years commitment, comes into a good success. So I hope this actually gives some overview how we can commit to this nice paper and actually lead to how we can succeed to one a nice Lancet paper. So what is actually the tips? Actually, as I mentioned earlier by Dr. Anu and also myself, interdisciplinary team for universal health coverage. We should know what is needed. So there's a health system specialist, economist, financial management, maternal program elementary statistician, and all, and even basic scientists. And that's actually come together, maternal and child health nutrition. So the perspective of the paper are actually put together how actually the overview of Indonesia as a model of the global change and also as a model of the second awakening of Indonesia of the universal health coverage after the family planning. So this is all important questions for research on this universal health coverage about the mixed intervention, how we reduce big burden of tobacco via universal health coverage, importance of the first 1,000 days of life, stunting reduction, early child development, and also we talk about adaptable method about impact of frontline digital system, investment early and active diagnosis treat, better universal health coverage, and so on and so on. So please kindly read this paper. Okay, so as mentioned also earlier, this is one of the nice tell story, comprehensive. We talk about the challenges that we face on universal health coverage. Indonesian universal health coverage is one of the largest in the world. This show that the gap of the missing middle are very important because only 52% of age 20 to 35 years in middle wealth quintile actually enroll, and which give a challenge to the health system. And also seen here, only less of the enrollment seen by the children from birth to 4 years of age, which is actually the vulnerable groups, which actually need to be put attention. So this actually give a lot of also insight for the policy. So that kind of papers, why we can do that? Because I learned actually from, at the same time, on the same time period, I actually also involved in the Lancet paper as the Eat Lancet Commission. And I see how the dynamic of building these papers take that experience in building the Lancet paper for universal health coverage, how the scientists become a scientist leader, how they can think of how we can influence the world. And actually, of course, commitment and a lot of meetings from overseas and put it together, 36 different experts from all over the world. So last, I would like to, do I still have time, Dr. Indah?
Yeah, actually it's almost finished, Dr. Rina.
Yeah, okay. So this is one of the studies that I also would like to share about the experience of being a first authors in Pediatrics Journal of Nutrition, BMC, which actually talking about probiotics. So this is the essence of this actually about multi-years, multidiscipline, multi-institution. So we started with the essence that probiotics works for treatment together with oral restoration solution. And then we would like to see whether these findings in the hospital can also impact to the public health. So we actually set the project and we finally published in these good papers. So then also one of the very rare intervention study in developing countries, only 5 in the world, which actually show a good impact on probiotics. So how we can do that is actually not like one-time thinking. It's really coming from the building the track. So I started early in 1997 with the same track of probiotics. So we did series of intervention studies. And now, even now, we still do the study also on brain probiotics and Cipulva intervention. This is hot topic, still hot topic. And then we publish also some of that are in 5-factor journal. So all is about commitment. It's all about patient. It's all about how we would like to this actually influence the policy and also the practice. We know that probiotics now is become one of the important aspect of the adjunct therapy for the many different aspects we need to take into consideration. But I don't want to scare people, or if you want to publish in one paper, we need to have this kind of commitment. But indeed, what we did for this study is actually 7 years commitment. So starting from grant, taking into account many different aspects in a very difficult area in Indonesia. And look at here, a lot of young scientists, about 120 co-workers working together and coming from many multi-stakeholders. Yeah. So, and now we have 2 other study which actually giving also a chance possibility for a high impact journal, but the essence is the same. Multidisciplinary, multi-years, 3 fatty acid for the development of 6 months of age cognitive function, which actually involve imaging of the fetal brain development during pregnancy. And of course, it's actually like what Anu mentioned, it actually a wow project that might end up with a good potential impact. Things that you done did from the beginning, so you can be known as expert on some
Dr. Rina, it's a very fun sharing of experience, and I definitely think you the time allocation, because I believe that all of us need to hear some experience from our doctors. So I hope that you can hear my voice clearly. Yeah, I think.
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you, because it seems like it's lagging. Okay, so we are now entering the question and answer session. There's already some questions submitted in the chat box, and I will read some of that, because I noticed that some already answered directly by the speakers. So I will only read the question that is not answered yet. The first question is for Dr. Anu. This is from Alfi Ruham. graduate student from the University of Airlangga. The question is that one of the key to a great paper is a well-executed study. But when one is in academic pursuit, such as in postgraduate or undergraduate school, time of study is limited and therefore limit the topic of study. Please share your tips on constructing a great paper from this time-limited study or tips to write great paper for postgraduate students. Please, Dr. Anu.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And I think the important thing is to plan in advance. That resources maybe are not as great as needed. And so being able to actually define questions carefully to the data actually good. The most important thing, the quality of the data collection and the study itself. So eliminated the major flaws. So that even in a short period of time, smaller study, you can still do something successful. Sorry, I think maybe there's maybe Inda, you're able to hear me okay, but the sound quality not so good. Oh.
I think, yeah, we can hear you clearly.
To actually study.
Thank you.
Able to hear me okay, or the sound quality?
I there's some up and downs in the sound. I don't know, but how about the other participants?
Yeah, I think there's a time lag, but I'll try to connect. That'll.
Okay, so maybe continue to the next question. This is for the questions are for Dr. Daniel. First is from Sangita from TL. Should imputation be done for dietary data? It is very important question for most of us. Sometimes
you mean the dietary data? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Dr. Linda? Not sure what's happening.
Dr. Daniel seems to be breathing.
Yeah, I think the sound is quite lagging, yeah, Dr. Dina, but I don't know, is it in my connection or is it
Daniel seems to be
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay.
I
Yes, I can hear you.
From the for those who have receiving error in the connection can sign out and in Zoom.
Oh, okay, Dr. Daniel offering. If anyone has any question, you can reach him to the email.
Yeah. Now I can hear Dr. Ervi clearly. How about the other?
Yes, clear, doctor.
Yeah, I can hear
Okay, so I think
you,
yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
you
I think
can send me
yeah,
an email.
it's okay. But I can still cannot hear Dr. Fatori actually. It's still lagging, but Dr. Ervi is clear.
maybe we can turn off all the video from the audience because I saw some are still yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we can ask them to stop video. So the bandwidth may be a problem. Okay. Yeah. I think it's now okay, Dr. Ervi.
Yeah. The participants' video have switched off now, Dr. Rina.
Okay. So since I believe we cannot hear Dr. Daniel voice clearly, yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, maybe we can continue with question for
very
Dr. Rina.
Yeah. Okay, Dr. Yeah.
Dr.
Thank you
Rina,
very
there is a question from Ibu Kadek Tresna from FK Unut. The question is, currently she has 3 draft papers. Unfortunately, all of them are not complete and have not been submitted. Maybe her time, she thinks that her time management is not good enough. And she asked you to share tips and tricks so she can complete all this draft that she has.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Indah. So, yeah, so I understand it's always a problem that because of the time. So it's really, I understand. Yeah, so it is, yeah, so to have a productive time is one of the challenges to complete the papers. And what we can do actually, we have to find out when actually we feel that our productivity is optimal. Like for example, we can, for example, myself, I use the in time. So one of the people actually can do at night time. We have to find our the thinking about ourselves when we not productive time. Because we can have the young working with us and helping us to find factors that's being um, covered much based on the comment about, and we can uh, also involve the other so having all together working and just in one the paper about the that's a lot of actually work
yeah, I know that I said that not because there are some questions. This one is from the where there is some information regarding the some the publications fee. Okay.
Rina, we cannot hear your voice. Sorry.
But I can hear Dr. Ervik.
Okay. For those who still experience trouble, you can try to attend our webinar via YouTube. This is the live streaming. So
Can you hear me?
probably we can reduce the bandwidth load.
Yeah, can you hear me, Dr. Elvi?
Yeah,
Hello?
yeah. Okay, Dr. Rina.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear everyone.
So I changed my Change my network. Yeah. Okay. What? Hello, Dr. Karfi. Can you?
Yeah.
Should I repeat the
Yeah.
question?
Okay. What is the question?
Can hear you. No.
She asked that if we want to publish in high impact journal with open access, usually the issue is about the cost because it's quite expensive. So and then it is also
Yeah. So about the funding. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Not all the papers, impact papers ask for the payment. Like the Lancet paper, we will not ask for the fee, and pediatric that I actually publish also not ask for the fee. So usually, but open access, usually they will ask for the fee. And I understand that we don't really have a problem of, usually many resources would like to actually fund this particular payment for the, if we actually publish in high impact. But the problem is we have to plan ahead. A lot of, actually from the Ministry of, from the government, from university, yeah, we hardly pay actually. Resources can be done, but it has to be planned ahead. We really want to actually many plan ahead. Hello, I have a problem with first media, so yeah. I have a problem. Yeah.
Can you hear me now, Dr. Rina?
Yeah, Dr. Indah, I can hear you, but a little unclear. Yeah, because probably because the weather,
Oh,
the connection.
yeah. Yes, true. Maybe.
Yeah, okay. Hello, Dr. Indah.
No. Or yes.
Yep. Your network now is low. Your network bandwidth. I don't know what. Probably.
Okay. Is there any other question, Dr. Indah?
Credit and responsibility as well as misunderstandings
So
among
there's a question on
participants due to the disagreement about what and when to publish, and also due to discontent with a slow collaborator. So what is your tips?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hello, Dr. Rina.
Yeah.
Dr. Rina, I
Okay.
already sent the questions on your WhatsApp. Probably you can
Okay, thank you.
respond one or two
Yeah.
questions again.
Okay, yeah, okay. So one question from Nindi Sabrina about payment on the open access. Yeah, this is actually already earlier. Usually we don't have much of the problem. Some of the high impact do not ask for the payment, but open access usually is being asked, and many resources actually are willing to pay that, and actually uh, not only coming from government but university, but sometimes other collaborators, they actually have the resources. So until now we don't have much problem on this one, but we have to plan ahead that particular expenses. Particular expenses. That particular expenses. Questions on the consortium, how we can include in the consortium. The first, actually, the most important that we have to build the track record of our papers. Really focus on the high quality papers, and of course build the network. There's a lot of collaborators in consortium on making the papers. We can include one of them, like for example, the global burden of disease. They open for many researchers from the foreign countries. So we have to propose to them that we would like to involve. Dr. Indah, for example, she um, non-communicable disease or something like that, which actually also as consortium. The one that I joined for Lancet Commission actually being appointed or being invited, and this actually more on the global commitment, and we can actually show that our commitment and also dedication, um, the the papers, and how we can actually give our idea from low middle income countries, because usually they will actually wait for our statement, our contribution. So there's a lot of consortium we can build up also ourselves, like the probiotic study that I actually built up ourselves, and then always try to submit grants. We submit grants less than never than a year. So the more grants we submit, the more potential that we can build the consortium, and always try to connect with the international collaborators as well as the national.
Okay, thank you very much for the question, Dr. Rina.
Yeah.
I hope that you can now hear my voice clearly.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Indah.
Okay. So I think we are now all the speakers, Dr. Anuraj Shankar, Dr. Daniel Fatori, and of course, Dr. Rina Agustina. So I think my task here as the moderator for the
Dr. Indah, thank you for your participation as a Madam Chair in this session. I would like to give the time to the Master of Ceremony. Please, Dr. Faisal and Ms. Yudi.
Okay, thank you for the nice session we had with Dr. Indah, Dr. Shankar,
an enlightening presentation. We hope all of us found this morning discussion informative and useful. For announcement,
Okay, Uni, I think your connection is not good. Yeah, I will continue. Everyone can clearly hear my voice.
Yes.
Yes, Faisal, I can hear you. Yes.
We can hear you, Faisal, very well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we will now continue the second session. But before that, now is the polling time. All of the participants can interact by poll. There will be 2 questions appear in your screen. Please select answer that was suitable to. Okay. So first many times you will submit your manuscript to Scopus Index journals. And the second one, what is the highest number of journals you have had appear for voting step? Okay, and in session, I will invite Dr. Shankar to the of this discussion. For that, I will read the city of Shankar. Is a British fellow from Indonesian and he had also worked at WHO, Geneva, and Helen Keller International. He had 86 peer-reviewed publication and 10 book chapters and monographs. Currently, he has yes. Okay, Dr. Anuraj, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay.
Are you with us?
Yeah, thank you. I think you can hear me. Maybe we would just proceed to the presentation of the next session with Dr. Elizabeth Prado. And Beth Prado is an assistant professor in the Department of Nutrition at UC Davis. Received her PhD in psychology from Lancaster University in the UK. Has several very high impact publications. Currently a global leader in early childhood development, and find her presentation extremely interesting. Beth, over to you then. I hope your connection is suitable and our Zoom will support you well. Just
Okay. So I hope you can hear me. Let me get my chat open, just in case. Okay. So I wanted to have a poll asking this question because I hope you noticed when you saw the results of that poll that many of us have had papers rejected many times. So I'm hearing an echo. Let me just put in my headphones, see if that helps. Okay. So I really like this. Is the sound sounding as bad to you as it is to me? I hear myself echoing, but in a really delayed. Okay, that sounds better. Okay. I really like this iceberg illustration because what you can see here, is that what people see is typically success that people have. So when you have papers accepted, I'm not sure if they just restart the whole Zoom. It seems to me like of myself being very delayed and slow and I'm not sure who's in charge.
Sorry to interrupt. The and again and start after everyone. Start with the maybe around 200 or below 200. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear anything that you said.
But your voice is quite clear, Elizabeth. I can hear it clearly.
Sorry. Dr. Diki, can you hear Dr. Prado?
Yeah. I can hear the voice of Dr. Prado clearly.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, should I just keep going?
Yeah, I can
Someone say yes. Sorry. Oh, back. I can't hear anyone else clearly. So should I keep going?
Yeah,
Yes, Dr. Prado.
going on, Dr. Prado. You can go ahead. Thank you.
We can hear you well.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so now I'm totally distracted from my train of thought. But yeah, so success is what people see, like the tip of the iceberg. But what goes into that success is a lot of hard work and dedication and disappointment and really a lot of failure, which isn't really failure, because if you learn from your rejections and other things that feel like failure, then that was actually what leads to success. So it takes a lot of persistence to be successful, and especially when your goal is to publish research in high impact journals. So I have been given the topic of talking about how to write a discussion, cover letter, and response to reviews. So I decided to organize these slides as common pitfalls. So we'll start with common pitfalls in writing a discussion. The first one is mixing the results and the discussion. So how to avoid this pitfall is to really make sure that in your results section, you're only reporting results and not discussing them. So it can really be a temptation that when you report that result, you want to tell the reader right away why that result is important, but you don't want to do that. The results should only report the results, not discuss what those results mean or why they're important. The discussion of what those results mean and why they're important should go in the discussion section. And in the same way, you should not report new results in the discussion section. So if you haven't reported the results already in the results section, then you shouldn't mention that in the discussion. Anything that you want to talk about in your discussion, you should have already reported in the results section. So it's a really common pitfall that these two get mixed up, but it's really important to keep them separate. The second common pitfall is that there's no clear structure or argument. So to avoid this pitfall, what's really important is to make an outline. So So you always want to first decide what you want to say, and then structure your discussion to make the points that you want to make. So typically, the first paragraph of a discussion is a very concise summary of the results. And then the next few paragraphs, or the rest of the discussion really, is putting those results in the context of previous studies, saying what's similar to what's been found before, what's different to what's been found before, what does this study add, and why does it matter? If you found anything that was maybe surprising, you want to explain that. And then the last paragraph is typically the overall conclusion. And again, coming back to the big picture of why this matters. But what's really the most important thing is having a plan first. So you want to make an outline of what you want to say, and then write each paragraph to make those points. Another common pitfall is that important background might be missing. So you can avoid this pitfall by really doing a thorough literature review of previous studies. And this takes time. So it does take time to, search PubMed, search other databases for your keywords that are relevant to your study, and really try to find every study you can find that that is important background information for whatever topic you are writing about. And most of this is going to go in your discussion. So in some disciplines, in some journals, introductions are long, and you typically put a lot of the background information in the introduction before you go into your methods and results. But in medical journals, that's not the case. It's typical for medical and nutrition journals that they want a very short introduction, maybe a page and a half or something like that. So you really can't put all of the relevant background information in the introduction. So most of that is going to go in your discussion when you're putting the results in the context of previous studies and saying why they're important. And if a reviewer is reading your paper and sees that you have left out really important, relevant studies, then you probably are not going to get a very positive review from that reviewer, because they will, they'll think, oh, maybe that this author made shortcuts, didn't actually put the time in to read all the background literature, didn't do a good job finding all of the previous relevant studies. So that's really important, because your study basically should be building on everything that's known and then moving that knowledge forward. So answering a question that hasn't been answered yet. And in order to do that, you really have to have a good understanding of everything that has gone before. Another common pitfall is that the strengths and weaknesses are missing. So you always want to include a paragraph in your discussion that talks about the strengths and weaknesses of your study. So this is, some people like to put this towards the beginning of the discussion, other people put it towards the end of the discussion. There isn't really a right or wrong place to put this, but it does have to be there. So you especially want to highlight the strengths of your study, and for any weakness, explain how you have mitigated that weakness, right? So if you highlight some of the weaknesses of your study, then think about, okay, so that's a weakness, but how can I show that my results are valid and robust, even despite this weakness? You should get into that habit of any weakness that you find or that you highlight in your paper. Also say, but however, we did this, this, and this to try to show that our results are robust and valid, even despite this potential weakness. Okay, so that's the discussion. Now we'll talk about a little bit about the cover letter. So the first common pitfall when you're writing your cover letter is that it doesn't grab the reader's attention. So you really want to say in the very first sentence of your cover letter, what is exciting about your study and why it's important. So as Dr. Anuraj was saying, what is your wow statement? What is going to make people say, wow, this is a really interesting study. We want to publish this study. That's what you want the editors to say when they read your cover letter. So focus on the big picture, not the technical details of the study. The editors will get those details from the abstract, from reading the paper. So you do definitely want to highlight in your cover letter the main results. So what are the main results of what you found, but not necessarily the technical details. You want to focus on the big picture and why your study is really important. Another common pitfall in writing a cover letter is that it's not tailored to the journal. So it's very important to go onto the journal's website and read the scope. So every journal, you can go to their website and it'll say, what is the scope of this journal? And it will say there phrases like this example that I put on this slide. This journal publishes findings that inform public health policy and practice. So if the journal's website says that, you should use that exact phrase in your cover letter and say, these findings, meaning my findings, the findings that I found in this study I'm submitting, these findings inform public health policy and practice by, and then finish that sentence. So you want to show the editors that your paper is appropriate for their journal, that your paper is what they are looking for based on what they have said they're looking for on their website. You always want to be careful about plagiarism. You don't typically want to copy phrases that other people have written, but in this case, I would say copy exactly the phrase that the journal has written, because and you can also do this when you're writing grant proposals. If the funder has said they want something specific, use that exact phrase and say why your study gives them what they want really clearly. So a couple things about responses to reviews. The first one, the common pitfall, is responding to the reviewer without modifying the manuscript. So this is really common, but the first thing that I would recommend you do when you get your reviews from the reviewers is to divide the comments into two categories. So first of all, you don't agree with the comment and you do not want to make whatever change to the manuscript the reviewer suggested. And then the second category is that you agree with the comment and you will make the changes to the manuscript. And typically, most comments will be in this second category. Your goal is for the reviewer to accept your revisions, right? After you respond to the reviewer is going to receive that response and see what modifications you have made to the paper. So you want them at that point to be happy with what you've done. You want them to say, okay, this person has taken my comment seriously. They've made an effort to improve the paper based on the feedback that I gave. Now I'm going to recommend to the journal that this paper be accepted. That's what you want the reviewer to think. So it's really important to consider very carefully what the reviewer has said, and in general, make the changes the reviewer suggested. If you really disagree, or if the reviewer has really misunderstood something, then that's when you put that comment in category 1.
that you don't agree, and you're gonna actually respond and tell the reviewer why you did not make a change to the manuscript that was suggested by the reviewer. So this is especially if the reviewer asks for a clarification, you want to make sure that you don't just write a response, that you actually make the same clarification in the manuscript. I see that a lot, that the reviewer asks a question and the author just writes a clarification in the response to reviews, but then doesn't change anything in the manuscript to make that more clear. And if a reviewer has a question about something that wasn't clear, then probably other readers are going to have the same question. So you really have to make that same clarification in the manuscript itself. Another common pitfall is dismissing reviewer comments without careful consideration. And this is the same thing that I was just saying, that you really want to do as much as you can to make the changes the reviewers suggest. So if you decide that for a certain comment you really disagree and you want to argue with the reviewer and say, I'm not going to make this change, you have to write a very clear explanation for why you disagree. And this is not something you have to do, the second bullet point. This is just a tip. It's something that I like to do. I typically like to say something about the comment that I agree with and then explain why I disagree. Like I'll say, oh, I agree with this, but, and then I make my argument. Or I'll say, good point. Like, this is a really good point about this point that you made, but this, and this is why I don't agree with, what you're saying, and I'm not going to change anything in the manuscript. But you typically want to just consider that really carefully and make a very clear argument for make your case for why you disagree. So here's an example. The details are not important, but I just wanted to point out that this is a comment, this is actually a comment I received on a paper. And then we wrote this response, but then, so we made this point to sort of argue with the reviewer's comments, but then we made another point, and then we made another point, and then we made another point. So you can see here that we have 4 paragraphs to respond to this one comment by the reviewer. So we didn't just stop with our first argument. We went on and said, and we also, see this in the data. And then we did more analyses and we said, and the data also supports our argument because of this. And then we looked at something else that we could support our argument. So we really went in depth to make our case for why we want to keep our interpretation. And this is really, you want to argue with the reviewer, especially on key points that where you've interpreted your data in a certain way and you really believe in that interpretation. And if the reviewer, is suggesting that you change your interpretation, you want to make a really strong case for why you're going to keep the interpretation the way that you've written it. So don't just stop with one argument, right? Think it through from all the different angles that you can, and look at the data and make a case for why the data really support your interpretation. And sometimes Dr. Shankar can tell you stories about responses to reviews that are even longer than the original paper. He's had cases of that, and that can sometimes happen. Another common pitfall is not stating clearly what modification you've made in the manuscript. So what you want to do in your response, of course, you're going to list every comment the reviewer has made. You're going to, for each comment, write your response underneath, and then say the line number where you have changed the manuscript in accordance with that reviewer's comment. So here's an example where a reviewer said, you know, the description of this test is difficult to understand, define what is meant, explain it in more detail, an example might be useful. So here in the response, we said, well, we've added an example to explain the test in more detail. And we say the line number in the paper where we've made that change. And then we actually quote the sentence that we added. So the clearer, the better. So you want to make it as easy as possible for the reviewer to understand what you've done, how you have changed the manuscript in response to their comments. So that's all I had, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if we're going to do questions now or at the end of the session.
Thank you, Beth. That was outstanding. And we're going to go ahead and move on, and we'll have additional questions after the second speaker. So that was really great. I like how you hit all those key points about, you know, how to proceed. So I think we're going to move on to our next speaker. Last but not least, so this we'll hear from Dr. Diki Tahapati. Dr. Tahapati is an internist in the staff of Metabolic Endocrine Division in the Internal Medicine Department at Faculty of Medicine at Universitas Indonesia. He's a senior researcher in that cluster, and he has many papers that are published, some highly cited ones, and we're looking forward to hearing from Dr. Diki. He was actually a key participant in a recent international workshop that we had, giving very excellent and top advice to several participants. So welcome, Dr. Diki. We look forward to hearing from you. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Dr. Anuraj, for the very kind introductions. I would like to share my screen. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So in this afternoon, I was asked by the committee to share a bit on my experience as a clinician in producing high-impact papers in medical science. A little bit on my background. So I currently work as an internal medicine specialist at the endocrinology division, as mentioned by Dr. Anuraj. So this is the hospital of Dr. Cipto Mangunkusumo Hospital, tertiary care hospital and national referral hospital for Indonesia. And on the other hand, also work as a researcher, also as a lecturer at the Faculty of Medicine of Indonesia. And the modern building behind the Faculty of Medicine is actually the Indonesian Medical Education and Research Institute. So I work in both places. So a little bit about my experience. I would not go into the details on how to produce high quality papers because it's already mentioned beautifully by the previous speakers, all the details, all the technique and so on. So I bid to give you an overview my experience as a clinician for the past few years. So this is my trainings that I've been currently having done for so far. So I did my MD for 6 years and the internal medicine for 4.5 years, and then PhD in Leiden for 4 years, and also in endocrinology for 2.5 years. Actually, I just finished my trainings in endocrinology. So I already did like training for 17 years, and almost majority of them, about 13 years, I spent on clinical training. So basically, I'm a clinician, more or less. But I also did some research when I did my PhD for 4 years. I learned a lot about how to do research and how to write papers out of my research. So I've been working at the hospital and also at the Faculty of Medicine since 2011. And after finishing my PhD, I started working at the IMERI as well. So if you look, actually, I just started my career as a clinician researcher. This is the number of citations, which actually is not that much of number, but I just started my career in the medical science. If you compare with the previous speakers that have enormous publication and citations, but I think maybe I can give you an overview on how to start your life as a clinician and researchers as well. So if you look into the duty that we as the medical staff at a teaching hospital that need to do, as a clinician, of course, we need to do the patient care. But on the other hand, we also need to do the teaching, not only to the preclinical students, medical students, but also to internal medicine residents, fellowship in endocrinology, and so on. And on the other hand, we also need to perform a research as well. So we have a triple track. So we are actually a clinician researcher plus teacher. So an individual who both conduct research and provide direct services, and as well as teaching and nurturing. So the benefit of being a clinician researcher is actually, as a clinician, you'll be able to see the problem that your patients are facing with. Then you can come up with an idea how to solve the problems. So many of the idea for the idea in our research group has came up from the problem that we are currently facing with our patients. So it is very nice to be able to combine those three aspects: patient care, teaching, and research. So by having a good research as well, you can improve the patient care. And by having a good research, you now can teach your students how to give an optimal patient care based on the data that you develop from your own research. So the question is about clinician and high impact papers. What I meant by high impact paper is not only high impact in terms of high impact journal, for example, Lancet or Nature and so on, but how your papers will actually influence the care of your patients, how will it influence the disease prevention at community levels and so on. So I have several tips that currently actually helping shaping my experience and becoming a clinician and also a researcher. Is actually you need to have a good mentor. A good mentor is not only the one who can give you an advice or give you a training and directions, but actually a good mentor should also be able to inspire you on how you perform your duty as a clinician, as well as performing other duty in teaching as well as in research. So for example, this is my supervisor from Leiden, Professor Yasdan Bahek Dr. Sartono. So both of them are immunologists from the Department of Parasitology. So they have a different background compared to the one that I have. I'm a clinician, I work at the endocrinology, while my supervisors came from the parasitology department, and both of them were not medical doctors, both of them are scientists. So when I gave them my first draft of paper, before I did my PhD, I do have 1 or 2 international publications. So when I gave them my draft of paper, I'm quite confident that it is quite a high quality paper that I have already written actually. But then when I get the feedback, all of them are marked with red notes. So I think the way of thinking between clinician and also scientist is quite different. So I really like the word from Anuraj previously on his chat in the Zoom. It is exactly the same that my supervisor told me. Your paper should tell a good story and should be supported by your data and your analysis. So I usually read this paper. The Joy of Writing Paper is quite really a simple paper that explains how to write a good paper with a good story. So actually, the most important thing that you need to have, you need to be a good storyteller in your paper. It's not only about the data of the analysis, but how you combine those data and those analysis in a good story. So my first paper came out, it's already asked previously by Dr. Prado, how many times have you ever rejected on your paper submitted? For this paper, this has been rejected almost 7 times. So it got accepted at the 8th submissions, but luckily it was accepted in one of a prestigious journal in infectious disease in the CID. I was very happy, but I think that the most important thing that I learned from Professor Yasdan and Dr. Satorno is when you write a paper, you need to tell a good story. So not just telling in your paper all the data that you've gathered, but the data should be written in a very good way to be able to tell a good story. So the next mentor that I have Professor Supali, who lead the our data collection in Nangapanda. It was a randomized controlled trial performed in a community based on about 4,000 people, of which around 1,600 we evaluated for 1 year. So we really work with a diverse people with diverse background. So we treat about 1,600 people, and I was the only MD at that team. Actually, we have other actually from dentistry. We have people from the nurse department, from the economy. We have people also from the technique, and so we have a diverse background. So that has taught me a lot on how to collaborate with people with diverse background, to be able to run a good research project, to be able to write a paper. You need to have a good collaborations because you will need a different expertise. And this collaboration has been successful. This is also the one of the paper that we wrote together about the protocol paper. And then I also have Professor Pradana. Is also a good mentor for me. He always supported and always very supportive in all the research that we perform. This is the when we go 2 years ago, just before the pandemic, we went to AFES to present our research. Professor Pradana, me, and we also have several students, a fellow in endocrinology, also have a fellow in internal medicine, also a students. So we have a group of people working together in research from diverse, also different level of education as well. So my first paper actually was written with Professor Pradana about a systematic review on the diabetes management in Indonesia. So having a good mentor is really important. So I would suggest for you who really wants to be a clinician, also a researcher, you need to find a mentor. Could be your senior, could be your teacher, could be your colleague that has performed quite well in those roles. So the next important thing is to have a collaborative network. We as a clinician mostly work with the clinical things at the hospital, where we need also to collaborate with people from the basic research as well, and also with the people expert working on the epidemiological research, because we cannot possible have the expertise in all three fields. So we need to collaborate each other. We have a close collaboration with also with our hospital, also with the local health authority. We also have collaboration with NIH of Indonesia as well. So we can also publish several papers because we then have collaborations. For example, this is about the paper on the impact of high-fat diet on the metabolic profile. We have a close collaboration with people from the nutrition department, also with the biochemist analyst at the Leiden, Yanan Wang, and also Professor Ranson from the basic science from endocrinology department at UMC. We also published a paper on more on the epidemiology research, collaboration with also the Ministry of Health as well, and the clinical research. So as a clinician, actually, you have a lot of data to publish, to be honest, especially if you have a good data set on your patients. When you see the patient, there's a lot of idea that can come up with. For example, I work at the endocrinology clinic. We saw a lot of patients with diabetes who plan to fast during the Ramadan fasting. So, but the question is whether is it safe for them, because the change of diet, the change of type of food they consume, it might also make them prone to the risk of acute complication of acute hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia. So the idea was simple. We just want to prove. We put them on a continuous glucose monitoring system to monitor how they had to do during the Ramadan. And we can publish the data, the result of our study in quite a good journal. So the having seeing the patient, I think it gives you a more benefit in seeing the real problems that your patient is currently facing with. So one of the important aspects as well is actually about the research topics. Your research topics should have clinical impacts. And the next one should unique and specific. And the third one is you need to be keeping time with update. I think unique and specific is important. If you, for example, live in Indonesia, I prefer to publish a research that's related with, for example, obesity and diabetes, but related with more specific problem of Indonesia, which is might related with the infectious disease, for example, parasite infections, tuberculosis, and other infections as well. The update, usually I use the emails. I subscribe from email from the a prestigious journal on my fields, but then I think it's takes too much time of mine. So I switched to Twitter. I use Twitter to follow the updates from the prestigious journal in my field. I think it's quite nice because it's really compact, so you can keep up with the update on your field. And it is important because one of the things that is important is actually have your paper published timely. So we did a 2 systematic review. I have a wonderful student in Alice Tamara and also Gilbert. We published 2 papers on COVID, especially in relation with obesity and also with admission blood glucose. And this have led to another collaboration with University of McMaster, Canada, because we are then asked to provide suggestion to WHO about the role of obesity and COVID-19. So you need to be able to choose the topics on your field that it has a clinical impact, that is unique and specific, that you really like, you have patience, and also you need to keep updated with the recent research. And of course, this is always asked about the time management because it's difficult as a clinician to divide your time between the clinical services, between teaching, bedside teaching, as well as doing research. I think it's good to have a protected time. For example, you can divide your schedule. I usually didn't do a lot of clinical service during, like for example, Tuesday and Friday, because usually I use those time mostly for discussion with my students, as well as writing papers on our grants, for example. But of course, that's not always be the case. For example, this is my routine as in clinical service for every Thursday, for example. So while explaining to the students as well about the clinical care for patient, 5 minutes before this graphic is taken, I also discuss with my students about the revision of their thesis as well. So yeah, you need to be able to juggle a bit between how to think as a researcher, as a clinician, also as a teacher as well. But it's quite, I'm quite happy with that because it gave me a lot of alternative instead of just just treating patient. You can have like a lot of alternative. And of course, if you have a protected time, then you need to have a high quality team as well, because you need someone to cover your clinical work. For example, if you decided to have like 1 day of protected time, you need to reschedule with your colleagues as well, when to delegate some tasks to them as well. So this is, if you know, this is Dr. Dante, is the head of the endocrinology divisions, currently now the Vice Minister of Health. So we have a high quality team consisting of the senior staff as well as the students. We also have a young research fellow as well working in our division. The Cindy is also wonderful students as well, as wrote a lot of papers and high quality as well. So of course, you have the benefits of clinicians and researchers because you can see the problems at hand. But then you have also several problems. Then you need to have, first, you need to have the good mentors. You need to have a collaborative network. And you need to have a unique research niche that you have patient and it's quite specific to your specialty. And the last, but this most important thing is you need to have a good time management and you need to have a high quality team. So this is the last slide of my talk. So what we do research not to get our paper in Nature. Of course, we would be very happy if our paper is accepted in Nature. We do research not to get famous, but we do research to help our patients and we do research to help our community. I think that's all for my talk. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I will give the time back to Anuraj. Please, Anuraj. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Dickey. That was just amazing, outstanding presentation, really hitting so much of the practical point, key points, and really this this idea that you highlighted, that this high impact research, it's not just to have a paper. In fact, the real thing that we're trying to do is, improve people's lives. And so, so focusing on the quality of the work and then how that translates into policy and practice, all really important. And we had a really nice presentation from Dr. Elizabeth Prado. Very nice, Beth, highlighting really how to deal with all these different comments, how to deal with the submission process of making your paper clear and so forth. So I think we're now open for questions. For these two speakers, we have around, I think, 25 minutes or so, 30 minutes to have some really nice questions. And so the floor is open. Let's see. So I see some questions coming here for Beth. Yeah. Dr. Airfee has posted. So Beth, can you comment a little bit on this issue of writing a paragraph that's focusing on the internal validity of the work and how to make that more clear? And also, sometimes there's this idea of being able to submit a paper. This is a query or comment from Dr. Ostry about, the pre-submission inquiry. Can that be useful for saving time, to write to the journal editor? And so then the last one is that from Dr. Davrina is addressing limitations in a discussion, how to really explain better when there's a small sample size and this reduces the power of your study, how to weigh how that invalidates your results, but still perhaps giving some justification for why those results might be important. So that's initial set of questions for you, Beth, and then we'll come back to the set for Dr. Dickey.
Okay, so the first one on internal validity, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. So if you could maybe tell me what you mean by internal validity. Yeah. And I'll go on to the others maybe in the meantime.
Okay, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so as for contacting the editor before submitting, I've actually never done that. So I don't know if that's typically saves time, or if that is a successful, I don't know, maybe Dr. Anuraj or Dr. Rina, have you had experience doing that and found that that's useful? I've never done that, so I don't know.
Maybe I can give my experience. Yeah, I did that for, we call it a presumable inquiry. So I did that for pediatrics as well as other papers. I did 3 times of that, and I send the abstract, and then they say that I'm interested. They will mention whether they're interested or not. So the one in pediatrics, they did send me the response, and they say that they are interested, so I can send and submit. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so yeah, maybe it probably depends on the editor, whether they'll get back to you or not. I know they're very, very busy, so you could always try, and if they didn't get back to you, just submit your paper. And as for the small sample size, so if you have found a positive significant effect with a small sample size, then I would say you don't have a limitation. Well, so typically the problem with a small sample size is that you can only detect large effects. You don't have the power to detect small effects. So if you find no significant results, then you might be underpowered. There might really be an effect, but you couldn't detect it because your sample size was too small. So in that case, that small sample size might be a limitation of your study. But if you have found a positive significant effect with a small sample size, then I would say, well, yeah, but it could be by chance. I mean, I would probably say that in addressing that limitation, that, further studies are needed to replicate the result, right? That's a basic principle of scientific research is that if findings are true, they'll be replicated. But I would say that if you found a significant effect with a small sample size, you've found a large effect. You've probably found a large effect. So that's actually strengthens your results because the effect is large. I don't know, Dr. Shankar, do you have other ideas about that?
You know, I think that, you know, two things. You know, first, yeah, on the pre-submission inquiry, yeah, for sure. I think that's, you know, that can be a good idea. I would say that if you think your paper has a good chance, you know, write a very strong cover letter for it. On the issue, though, Beth, you know, the second issue on the sample size and so forth, I think that I think this is where, you know, telling the story, it can become very important. So you have a study, it's underpowered. One argument you can make is that, so the issue becomes this, right, is that whether or not what you're observing is due to chance or not. And because it's underpowered, your ability, of course, is to say it's due to chance or not, you know, it's much less because, you know, your p-value might be 0.1 or, you know, 0.2 or something. So there's 20% chance this would have occurred by chance. So the challenge there becomes then to look at other outcomes that are uncorrelated with the primary outcome that you've looked at and say, look, our data, in fact, is associated with this outcome with a certain p-value and associated with this other outcome as well, that's part of the causative pathway. And it's unrelated to the first outcome in a sense. So and try to build a case that, look, these two p-values are not below 0.05, but together it's actually a low probability event. So we believe this is a genuine effect. So, you know, of course, you don't want to be in the position where you have to try to make such arguments in the first place. But if you are, I think if you can show a consistent pattern of an impact of your intervention or risk factor, whatever it is, then that can be convincing. And I think, you know, the methodology that Dan Fatori showed about this, you know, curve analysis, that's really what that is trying to get at, is looking at a lot of the data together and seeing if it's consistent with an effect and consistent with your conceptual framework. I think that's why we were saying before on this idea of the conceptual framework, because it gives you an idea to then test multiple hypotheses within that conceptual framework that you defined a priori. So that's what I would say. You know, it's not a good position to be in. The best advice is to avoid that. But if you're in that, yeah, you've got to try to build your case. Yeah. Okay, so Beth, any final comments from you? We're going to go on to some other questions for I think Dickie here.
Nope.
Okay, so Dr. Dickie, you have some very interesting questions here. You know, advice you might have for clinicians, where to find you know, mentors that would be appropriate. That's a really good question. And then also, you know, how do you help clinicians? A very good question from Dr. Ostry. How do you help clinicians to really find the time to, you know, be able to do research and papers, to allocate, you know, the effort for that if they don't have enough protected time? And then last question, I would like to ask you personally, I'm very impressed with all the work that you've done. And how did you make the transition, you know, from doing your doctoral work, really being almost fully focused on that in Holland, and to coming back into a very different situation? And yeah, I guess how you were able to prioritize, you know, being able to carve out the time to become a successful physician scientist. So these are, I think, three issues, very related questions. Yeah. Over to you, Dickie. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Anuraj. Yeah, I think the idea of finding the right mentors is, yeah, it could be anyone actually, but I think the first step that you need to do is find someone like in your environment first, because sometimes you don't realize that you have somebody that actually quite excel in some part, but also you need also to have maybe several mentors, because maybe one mentor is really good and giving you an insight, an idea on how to perform research, while the other one might have a good insight on how to write a good papers, how to present nicely, and so on. It doesn't have to be on one package that fits all. You can have several mentors that can improve different aspects that might be useful for your career as a clinician and also as a researcher. But you need to find a person that's really excel in your field. So it depends. Maybe you know well in nutrition who are the one who excel in nutrition, and for example in FKUI or Indonesia, then you can try to contact that person as well. And the next one is actually, yeah, it's a bit difficult when we translate from doing full research in the Leiden, and when I went back to Indonesia, because I don't have the luxury of time anymore. In Leiden, I can have like 40 hours a week just to do the analysis, just to write a paper, and now I don't have that one. So I need to prioritize my time. And that's at the beginning of my transition is quite difficult, because all the clinical works actually usually cannot wait. You need to prioritize the clinical work, because it has to do something with patient care. So you need to discuss with your superiors as well whether we can arrange the schedule and so on. I'm very lucky, because my superiors actually quite supportive, saying, okay, then we can set a schedule. In some days I would do clinical work, in some 1 day or 2 days of the week I can also still focus on doing research, because you cannot just like spare some time that is not really a golden time. I really like when you want to write a paper, when you want to write a grant, you need to have a golden time, a high quality time that cannot be distracted by other things. Then you need to prioritize things. But the question is whether a lot of clinicians would like to do that. So actually, to be frank, in Indonesia, we have quite a lot of problem with clinicians when they want to prioritize time for writing papers. First, because they are really busy, and then because maybe from the financial point of view, this is better to taking care of the patient, to be frank. But a lot of clinicians also have problems when they want to be, for example, to be a full professor, because they don't have many publications. So I think one of the key is the patient. First, the patient, whether they want to do research, whether they want to improve the quality of care, whether they want to teach the student based on the research they're currently doing. Because I think in some or a lot of teachers now in Indonesia, they usually teach, but using the data from other countries, for example, not using the unique data that they develop by their own. So, but actually now I think the government trying to give incentive on at the financial aspect for clinicians to be able to produce a lot of more research and papers, and also they force them to do it, because otherwise there will be difficulty in attain a promotion to, for example, associate professor or a full professor, because they need to do research. But I think the main important thing is in go back to yourself whether you want to do it or not. If you want to do it, I think you can do it. You just need to prioritize things. I think that's all, Dr. Anuraj.
Okay, yeah, no, that's very, very good advice. I think for especially all the young scientists here on this call, that sort of insight into things as well. I wanted to raise this other issue also for both of you. Essentially, this has come up, Beth, you mentioned this, and Dr. Dickey as well, this importance, of the team, of researchers sort of coordinating the team. And could you maybe both comment on that? Like, how do you grow, how do you become part of, and how do you grow yourself, the team of researchers on a specific project, to make it successful? What are your thoughts about that sort of approach? And then also, working on the paper itself. Yeah, whoever wants to go first. Yeah, Dickey. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, I've learned a lot from Professor Taniawati Supali actually how to build a good team, combining diverse people with a diverse educational background. Usually, Anuraj, for most clinicians, they really tend to work with MD alone. So they form a team with all MD. But actually, there's a lot. There's a good side, but there's a lot of also hindsight as well. Right now I prefer to work with people with a diverse background because it can give me a lot of benefit in terms of different point of view, different aspect of how we run our research. Because it's not possible to just lean on MD because I need a different perspective, for example, from the scientists from the basic science as well, because sometimes they have a unique or diverse different perspective that can enrich the idea of the research as well. And you need people who has more technical abilities to run the research, runs the research project as well. And in terms of writing a paper, I think it's also important to greatly involved, not only giving suggestion from far away. Usually most clinicians just do, I want to write a paper, this, but you're not really involved in writing the paper. I think for early career researcher or clinician, you should be involved in writing the paper because it's not as easy as it looks because you need to write the correct word and so on and so on. So you need to be involved, not only as supervisors high above that you give instructions, but you need to deeply involve also in the writing of the paper.
I would say it depends. I think it depends on where you are in your career, at least in terms of how to build a team or how to network, I guess, and meet collaborators. So if you are a student, graduate student, for example, and you have a mentor, then your mentor can be a great resource to connect you to people. So if you go to a conference, be intentional about asking your mentor to introduce you to people. Be around, be in the same places. Conferences are great places to meet people. Even internal conferences within your own university. If you're getting together with people from other departments, that's often where you can make those kinds of connections with people in different disciplines and with different skill sets. So if you are already a more of an independent researcher, you sort of have to take that initiative more yourself. If you don't currently have a mentor who's who you're working with directly, who can help you. But I've found that really, really helpful, is to have someone who's more senior than me introduce me to people. That facilitates those types of relationships. And then once you have a team, so I often work on very large projects with very large teams. So what we typically do in terms of producing collaborative publications is that we make a list of planned analyses from our project, and we specify who's going to be the first author. So the first author is the person driving the paper and writing the first draft and analyzing the data. So we specify who's going to be the first author for that paper, who's going to be the last author, which is the senior author, the primary mentor of that first author, and then who are going to be the co-authors for that paper. And we typically specify a core working team of people who review every draft along the way, and then a larger group of people who really only review the final draft. So, when you're working in large teams, that can be more efficient. If for each paper you always specify the first and last author, they have the primary responsibility, you specify your core working team, and then you specify your larger group of co-authors who will, contribute with critical input once the manuscript is more final, and then everyone, of course, approves the manuscript before submission. So that's just a little bit of practical, working with the team from my experience.
Okay. Yeah, that's very helpful. The meeting, a comment that just came in here from Jocelyn Febra Kalipusan, who is asking, what's the significance of having a collaborative network? So this is sort of, I think, separate from the collaborative team in a sense, but there's sort of a network that's collaborating, maybe either part of a multi-site trial, or maybe persons who are collaborators who are not directly directly on site, but sort of part of your general collaborative network. Can you comment on, what your experiences with that and what role that shaped or played for you?
Maybe I can go first, Anuraj. Fine. I think it's very important to have a collaborative network, because then you can expand your research as well. For example, as a clinician, you don't only need to expand to among clinicians as well, but you need also to expand to people who work at the basic science as well, because some clinical problem cannot easily answered by a clinical research. They need to be answered by basic research. So you can ask people from the basic science to join in your project as well. And on the other hand, to apply your clinical findings or your basic research finding in a more bigger perspective, for example, at the community, you need also to work and collaborate with people from the epidemiology as well. So I think it's very important to have a collaborative network in relation with the field of your study, not only as a basic, you need to expand also to clinician, also to maybe to epidemiological research as well. And on the other hand, in Indonesia, we have quite a lot of data, epidemiological data, that usually published more often by people from the public health. And usually as a clinician or as a basic science expert, you have a different view on how to analyze things compared to the people from the public health. So you need to discuss with them, give them a new insight, so you can publish a paper using the same data set, but a different point of view, and can be accepted in a high impact journal, or it can be a high impact papers. Thank you, Anuraj.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, Vicky. Beth, what are your reflections on this? Just the role of the wider network in support of your research.
I guess in my experience, I can't think of a collaboration apart from a project. Yeah, sorry, I'm not really sure.
All right, that's fine. So yeah, one final question. I would like to also open this up to Dr. Rina, because I think Dr. Rina, you right at the end of your presentations when we started having all those, internet connection problems. But essentially, I would like to get all of your three opinion about, how to go about raising funds for studies. So many of the comments we're seeing from the persons attending this webinar relate to smaller studies. What do they do with a smaller study? Not having enough resources. How can they have something high impact with smaller resources? So I'm wondering if, how do we assist people? What are some tips really about raising enough funds and resources to be able to do more of the high impact research, give them a better chance really of high impact research to both serve, the knowledge creation and also, of course, improving public health and client care. So, tips on, fundraising basically. Yeah, whoever wants to start first on that.
Can I actually go back to the internal validity question
Sure.
that
Sure.
I skipped before, and then we can go to the funding question? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can I hijack your agenda?
The floor is yours. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay. So just to go back, because I don't want to miss that question, because I understand it now. So I would say don't overinterpret your findings. So if your study design is correlational, then don't interpret it as a causal effect. That you should interpret that as an association that is hypothesis generating for further studies that have a design that can determine causality. I think that that helps. It makes your argument plausible, right? That you're not overextending your findings. And the other thing I would say is, in that strengths and weaknesses paragraph, if there are weaknesses that might compromise the internal validity, address them there. And try to find ways in your data to argue for why your interpretation is plausible, even despite the weaknesses. And if you have questions about that, call Dr. Anuraj, because he is great at that. You're gonna get 400 phone calls.
That's fine. Okay, great.
Okay, so on to the funding question.
Yeah, go ahead. You want to go ahead and continue on the funding part, and then let's love to hear from Dr. Rina and Dr. Dickey about that as well. You know, honestly, it's a struggle for me too. I think finding funding is a struggle for everyone. The best tip that I've found is have your ideas. So whatever your ideas are, write each idea up as a one-page concept note, where you kind of have your idea in a one-page form with your why the idea is important, what would your objectives be, just a simple, clear explanation of that idea. And then there's a lot of listservs that send out funding opportunities, and they're advertised on websites. And as you see those opportunities come up, try to match the opportunity with your idea, because that's really the key. The key is finding what the project you want to do and what the idea you think that's really important fits with something a funder wants to fund. That's because when it's a really good fit, you're most likely to be successful with your grant application. But I would love to hear others' thoughts as well. Yeah. What do you think? Dr. Rina, what are your thoughts? I know you're quite successful. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Actually, I learned from Dr. Anu as a grand champion. Okay. So there's some ways actually, not always successful, but it's a way forward. It's a way to go. So the first one is that we always have to aim high, and I never submit less than 10 a year. So since I graduated from my master program, so I always write a proposal to even a small or big, but I always aim as a big one. And my formula is if you submit 10, then you will get 1. But usually we end up with more. So, and then the second is actually look at the one which actually in our track, because track record is really important. So we try to find a grant which actually connect with our previous work. And usually that's quite okay. And then I can show that we can manage the work. And said this more on the formal funding. So just submit it. Don't be so perfectionist. Sometimes I have an experience with my first paper, for example. I hold it until some years, and then it's ending up when it is accepted, is not much change from the previous ones actually. So the same as proposal, we have to have a track record, always send a good proposal, but you don't have to be perfect. So then the most important to submit it before the deadline. And then the other way that you have to approach also informal. Sometimes you have to find a key person, like for example, my project on probiotics, I actually approached a professor who actually a director of VIFN at that time. And then, yeah, but that's actually, he's very influential and then can actually influence the organization to give funding. So sometimes we need to do this as well. And that's actually quite common happening, but of course, influencing in a good way. And then the last one is I never done it before, but I heard from my other colleagues. You can also approach sometimes the what they call it as the some kind of a donor which actually are from coming from the something like that. And sometimes they have I know in Netherlands, for example, there's a lady who actually very rich, and then she like to give away money for a research, for example. And we have to know what, that kind of link. And sometimes that can happen also. They can find a research. Yeah. So, but for the publication, don't worry. It's always somebody or someone wants to pay that. So if we don't want to submit the paper because we are afraid that we have to pay a lot, don't worry about that, because usually it is actually funded, but you have to still plan ahead. But some of the papers that I submitted also do not have to pay, although it's a high impact journal. And I don't know why they don't ask us to pay. And even I heard that some actually offer the funding if you want to submit it there and then being accepted. Yeah, I think that's all. And so submit minimal 10 a year. So hopefully we will get one. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, that was very useful. Dickie, what are your thoughts about this, raising funding, to support your
Yeah,
research? What
I'm
are some
sorry,
tips and
Anu.
tricks you think?
Maybe I would like to also
Yeah.
highlight the important to have a person in your group who knows very well about administration, bureaucracy, and finance. So I actually have Dr. Erfi is a very expert on this field, financial management of the research, and she knows how to actually put the right funding to be proposed. Thank you. Sorry for that.
Yeah, that's a very, no, thank you. That's a very good point. Yeah. Over to you, Dickie. Would love to hear your insights on this.
Yeah. I think our group is at different phase compared to Dr. Rina, because we are still at the earlier phase of trying to build our research reputation abroad. So we have a national reputation, but we haven't really had a worldwide reputation. So to be honest, I haven't really applied for international grant for the past 3 years, because when I finished my PhD in 2017, we tried to increase first the number of applications, also the quality of our publication first. What the aim is actually we apply for a local grant. So we apply quite a lot of grant from the Faculty of Medicine, UI, as well as from UI, as well as from the Ministry of Research and Technology. In 2019, we have around 15 grant, small grant, and in 2020, we have more than 20 local grant actually. What we do is actually at the start of 2018, we tried to make a big research project, several big research projects, because previously commonly found in the most department of clinic, usually we have scattered research topics. A person finished their PhD, then the research topic then stopped research. So we try to build continuity by having 2 or 3 large projects, and then we divide it into small research projects. And then we apply those small research projects to a local funding bodies. And of course, there's a lot of bureaucracy. Dr. Rina knows it well, but I also have people who really good at performing those administrative process. And one of the advantages of having those small projects is actually you are forced to do publication actually. So if I apply for 20 grant, so our group need to publish 20 papers on that year. So it's really quite stressful, but it forces you to have the outcome of publications. Maybe at the start, maybe at 2018 and 2019, we don't have those high quality publication of yet. But now in the reaching 2020, I think the quality of paper is starting to increase. So we are trying to do step by step. First, we try to increase our research reputation first nationally, and then trying to go abroad, and then maybe hopefully in the next 1 or 2 years we try to apply to a grant from outside source. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I like all those comments. Maybe I'll just share a little bit myself on this. I think the most critical thing in receiving a grant is submitting the grant. And so I think I would encourage everybody that to plan, look at what requests for applications or requests for proposals there are. Make a plan for that, just like you make the plan for submitting a paper for publication, by a certain date. So you make a plan for that grant submission. And I think that the other aspect is that whenever you meet someone, who is a donor or funding officer, make sure they know. I think this comment from Dr. Beth was very useful about, you already have this sort of 1 page or half a page, a concept note. And so you should be familiar with what you want to do and how much that's going to cost. And whenever you have a chance, anytime, my advice is anytime you're speaking with someone who has access to funds, make sure that person knows what you want to do and how much money you need. And don't be shy about that. I was actually on a call last night, and there were actually two different groups on the call, and one of them was saying that, hey, we just got a grant for I think $2 million or something, and then the other group said, we didn't get a grant from that foundation. And then he was saying, well, how did you guys get the grant? But, our team didn't get it. And then one of the officers from that second organization said, well, we never asked for the money. Right. And so that's why he didn't get it. And so I think that was, a common issue. It's a common point, is that don't be shy about sending an application. Don't be shy about wanting more resources. It's difficult to do research in today's world that's high impact without having sufficient resources. So I think really putting effort into planning for that is extremely important. So that helps to create high impact research that benefits your clients as well, of course. Yeah. And so yeah, that would be the main advice. And then the other thing I would suggest to everybody is that to write a good grant that gets funded, it's very helpful to hear or to experience being on a review committee for other grants, because you start to understand how grants are being criticized and why they're funded or not. What are the weaknesses in them? And so if you have the opportunity even to be an observer, or you have the opportunity to read comments that maybe other people received on grants that they submitted, it'll help you to understand what are the fatal flaws that, why a grant is not supported. So that's one thing that I would suggest, also. And then, the last thing is that please avoid under budgeting. That's a very, very common thing, that we believe that the smaller budget will somehow be more attractive and more fundable. But in fact, for a donor to process $50,000 or $100,000 or $1 million, sometimes it's not that different. And they may be looking to actually fund something larger. So definitely calculate your budget. Don't try to underestimate it and say, here's what we need, and then, so yeah, that's what I would suggest. Your work is important, and therefore you need funding to do your work. If you say you want to do some high impact work and you have a high impact idea, and someone says, well, how much do you want for this high impact idea? And you say $10,000, then right away that person's thinking that, well, how can it be a high impact idea for only $10,000? Right? So you need to really, think, look, this is an important idea. I can do this. This is a critical. We need X amount of funding for this, whether it's 500,000 or $1 million or more. So those would be sort of my reflections on that. And so I think that we're really reaching the end of our time here. I would just ask any final comment. I know Dr. Dan Fatori needed to drop off, but any final comments from our speakers just to share with the audience about advice for, how to, create high impact research and publish a high impact paper. I'd like some just final words from in 10 seconds or less from each of our panelists. Let me start with, I think I already shared what my comments were. Just, aim high, don't be shy, put your team together, and try to get the funding that you need to do that, to do the work. Dr. Rina, what would be your 10 seconds of final words advice for high impact papers and research?
Yes, I think my final word, we actually a big community of the global community. So researchers from developing countries, from low middle income countries, can always dream and aim high, and you can do it as a first, second, last, or corresponding authors.
Great advice. Okay, Dr. Beth, your final 10 seconds of advice for high impact.
Yeah, I agree with everything that has been said. And don't be discouraged, because even highly successful people get rejected. And we get our grants rejected, we get our papers rejected. It happens to all of us. So don't get discouraged. Keep going. You can do it.
Great advice. Okay, Dr. Dickey, final comment for you.
Okay, yeah. For clinician, you have the luxury of seeing the problems at hand, but you need to collaborate more with other people from other disciplines, from basic science or environmental science, to have to be able to help more people, not only the people that you treated currently at your clinical practice.
Okay, great. Fantastic, everyone. So it's very late in Brazil, so Dan Fatori is not with us, but I've known Dan Fatori for quite some time, and I think he would say he would agree with all your comments, and then he would also add that, really try to think out of the box and focus on some key interesting analytics that might be useful for you, such as the stuff that he presented. So with that, I think this scientific part, I'll bring this to a close, and I'll turn this over to our Master of Ceremonies for some final words and the closing of this. So thank you all. Over to our MC.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Anuraj, also Dr. Prado, Dr. Vicky, and Dr. Rina for the very interesting topic and discussion. We would also like to thank for all the participants for your very active participation. We hope this webinar provides insightful information to prepare for your great research and for your great manuscript. Okay, Uni.
Yeah, after going through the wonderful session, I think you agree with me that Faisal, that's the great conversation happening. We are almost close to the end. But before closing, let me thanks once again to the organizers. This webinar from Department of Nutrition and Human Nutrition Research Center, Indonesian Medical Education and Research Institute Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia, and Summit Institute for Development. Lastly, let me deliver the conclusions and recommendation of our discussion today. The first, how to transform a good paper to a great paper. First, find relevant and interesting topic to a wide audience. Second, have a collaborative network. Go for a wow study. have a national and global implications, have a good research question, well-designed study, and reliable data. Choose the best method available to answer your research question, and also make an outline before you start writing. Makes a clear discovery of interest, now or not, and discuss the strategies and weaknesses of your study. Commitment to finish the research can come into a great success. And last, have a role as the first, second, last, and corresponding author from the low middle income countries.
Sorry, Dr. Faisal, you still in?
Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, thank you, Uni. Thank you, Dr. Ervi. Finally, that ends our today event. And we would also like to remind all participants, please don't forget to fill out the evaluation form to claim your certificate. The link that will be not at the chat room. And on behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to beg your pardon for any mistake we have made during this webinar. And lastly, thank you for spending time with us today and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Everyone.
Professor
Yep,
Anuraj,
good luck, everyone. with your
Ado,
research.
Professor Daniel,
Bye-bye.
Dr. Vicky, and everyone. Thank you for all the committee. I would like to appreciate to all the committee, especially headed by Dr. Ervi and all the master ceremony, and also all the team from both sides, the UI and Summit Institute for Development.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you for the
Thank you, Dr. Rina
participants,
and team, for really,
participation, for
organizing this
everyone.
and making this
I
happen.
hope it is useful. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you for the speakers, participants, moderators. See you next time on the
Okay,
other webinar.
See you next time.
Yeah, good. Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, Vicky. Rina,
Bye.
Ervi, everyone. Okay. Take care. Yep.